I've spent a good chunk of my adult life out in the woods, always alone, always quiet. I don't think of myself as someone who actively seeks isolation, but there's something about being away from roads and phones and voices that calms me in a way nothing else really can. So I take off for long weekends when I can, especially in the Pacific Northwest. I've got a system, 2 well-seasoned gear, worn boots, a well-packed frame pack, and always 2 knives, one clipped to the shoulder strap, another in my pants pocket. I've seen enough to know it's not always animals you've got to worry about out there. This one trip had started like any other. I had set off early on a Friday morning, my pack snug and my route planned out. It wasn't a deep wilderness trek, at least not at the beginning. The first leg of the trail looped around the edge of a state-managed forest, and for a few hours it kept fairly close to some country roads and a few seasonal cabins that were shuttered for the year. I'd seen a couple of other hikers, older guy with a dog, a pair of women moving fast with walking poles, but they'd all been going the opposite direction, back towards civilization, and I figured by the time I hit nightfall, I'd be by myself again. It was late September, and the air had that sharp edge to it that tells you the season's turning. Trees were still mostly green, but a few were starting to pop with yellow and red. I had hiked maybe 12 miles that day, moving at a casual pace, stopping here and there to drink water or eat a granola bar. By late afternoon, the trail narrowed and started curling around a small pond. I hadn't remembered it from my last trip out this way, probably had taken a different fork, but it caught my attention. The water was still and dark, reflecting the gray sky overhead, and a thin layer of fallen pine needles floated along the edges. It looked like a decent place to stop for the night. I made a mental checklist as I scanned the area. Flat ground for the tent, enough rocks nearby for a small fire ring if I wanted it, and a tree line thick enough to provide some cover but open enough to see what was around me. That last part's important. I don't like being boxed in, especially when I'm alone. I started moving toward the spot I'd picked out when I heard something, off to the left, just beyond a cluster of boulders that rose like old bones out of the undergrowth. It was a shuffling sound, low and rhythmic, like something pushing against leaves and then pausing, then pushing again. At first, I figured it might be a deer. Happens a lot out there, noisy things, really. But then it didn't stop. The sound kept going, louder for a few seconds, then softer, then louder again. Not like an animal foraging, more like movement, repetitive movement. I paused, standing still enough that I could feel my heartbeat slow in my ears. One thing you learn early if you spend enough time outdoors is that the forest has a language. The wind through trees, birds calling out warnings, small animals skittering. Those are the sounds of a healthy, living woods. But sometimes you hear something that doesn't belong, something off, and you feel it before you even know what it is. That's what this was. Something that didn't belong. I slid the knife off my strap and took the other from my pocket. I wasn't scared exactly, just cautious. The sound was coming from behind the largest boulder, maybe 10 feet high and worn smooth with age. I moved slow, circling to the right, careful not to crunch the leaves beneath me too loudly. I kept my shoulders low and my hands steady, my thumb resting on the grip like I was trained. I don't know what I expected, a bear maybe, though they usually make more of a racket. A homeless person camping illegally. Hell, maybe even someone injured crawling along the ground. My brain ran through a dozen scenarios in the seconds it took me to clear the edge of the boulder. What I saw was not any of those things. There was a blanket laid out on the flat side of a rock, and on it, a man and a woman. Both maybe in their 20s, both completely naked. We're in the middle of having what I can only describe as some of the most energetic sex I'd ever seen outside of a movie. The sound I'd heard was the shifting of bodies and the rhythm of skin on skin, which was now unmistakable. They didn't hear me at first, but the second I rounded the rock, everything stopped. All three of us froze like animals spotting each other across a field. For a moment, I didn't even move. Then we all sort of yelled at the same time, a mess of shock and embarrassment. I threw up a hand like it would somehow make me invisible, turned on my heel, and just started walking fast, jogging back toward where I dropped my pack. The sound of them scrambling to grab their clothes followed me for a few seconds before fading. I passed their tent on the way out. A small, red two-person dome style set up near a tree, clothes strewn around it, obviously not zipped or packed properly. I kept my eyes forward and didn't look back. I didn't go far, just far enough that I couldn't hear or see them anymore. I found a different spot, maybe a quarter-mile up, where a thicket of young fir trees opened into a shallow rise. It wasn't ideal, but it was enough. I dropped my gear and got the tent set up quickly, more out of instinct than anything. My heart was still hammering. Now, I know how it sounds. Funny, right? Accidental voyeurism in the middle of the woods. But something about the whole thing left me uneasy. It wasn't just that they were there. People have sex in the woods all the time, I'm sure. It was that they were so deep in, so far off the trail, without a car anywhere nearby, no bikes, no gear other than the tent and blanket, no food or water that I saw. Just them. And I hadn't seen them on the trail that whole day, even though I'd passed through the only marked access points. Stuck in my head the rest of the night. I didn't make a fire, didn't want the light to give away my position. I sat in the tent with the flap open, eating a protein bar in the growing dark, knife resting next to my leg. I listened hard for any signs of movement, heard nothing but wind. I slept like crap that night, woke up 3 or 4 times to adjust my gear or just sit in the dark, trying to figure out why I felt so unsettled. Morning came in slow and gray. I didn't waste time, just packed up, skipped breakfast, and got back on the trail. I moved faster the next day, eager to put distance between myself and that pond. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, not just the obvious part, but all the details around it. The lack of supplies, the strange location, the way they'd reacted. Not just surprised, but panicked, like I'd caught them doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. About halfway through the day, I saw something that made me stop cold. I was coming down a ridge, the trail switchbacking through a steeper section, when I spotted a red tent in the trees below. Same make, same color. I crouched and watched for a long time, but didn't see anyone moving. After a few minutes, I kept going, not wanting to get involved again. I figured maybe they moved down the trail after I'd left. Maybe they wanted to avoid me as much as I wanted to avoid them. That night, I made camp further than I'd planned, pushed myself hard just to get to a spot I knew well from earlier trips. It was a safe little flat between 2 outcrops with a good view in both directions. No weird feelings that night. I still didn't light a fire, though. Just sat quiet, staring into the trees, wondering who those people were and why I had such a weird gut feeling about them. Next morning, I woke up to light frost on my tent and packed out fast. Didn't see anyone the rest of the way. Weeks passed, and I told the story a few times to friends, usually playing it for laughs. But something always stuck with me. The strange silence, the isolation, how deep in they were. It just didn't add up. That trip made me change the way I hike a little. I still go out alone, but I trust my gut more now. When something feels off, I listen. I don't push it, and I always keep both knives sharp. Sometimes I think about that couple. I wonder if they were just thrill seekers, maybe filming something, maybe high as hell. Or maybe they were running from something, hiding. Maybe they didn't want to be found. Maybe they weren't supposed to be there at all. And yeah, sometimes when I'm out deep in the woods and the wind dies down for a minute, I think about that red tent and the sound I heard behind that boulder. And I keep moving. When I first met my wife, we were both trying to get away from people. Not in a dramatic, antisocial way. We just liked being alone, especially outside. It started small walks around town, then hikes through state parks, and eventually weekend trips into places most people wouldn't think to go. We called it off-the-trail camping. It wasn't anything hardcore like survivalist stuff, but we always found those tucked-away spots off the main path where we knew we wouldn't hear other campers or see a flashlight cutting through the trees at night. We wanted space, silence, and time alone. There was one spot we kept going back to. It was maybe 2 miles off the main trail in a small national forest in the Pacific Northwest. I won't say where. The walk-in wasn't hard, just a bit of light bushwhacking. You had to duck under some thick branches and step over a few fallen trees. But there was this flat patch near a slow creek that felt like it had been waiting for us. We camped there maybe 5 or 6 times over 2 years. Nothing strange ever happened. Not even a deer walking too close to the tent. Just peace, trees, cold mornings, clear skies, sometimes light rain, the sound of wind through the branches. The last time we went there, it was early fall. The colors were just starting to shift but hadn't turned all the way. We parked, geared up, and made our usual quiet hike out to our spot. I had my old external frame backpack with the clunky buckles, and she had her smaller pack with the blue sleeping pad rolled tight at the bottom. We carried just enough: tent, pads, sleeping bags, some food in a bear canister, water, and a jet boil for coffee and oats in the morning. It was a 2-night trip. The first night was like all the others. We pitched the tent in the same little clearing where the soft pine needles had built up over time, making the ground feel like a padded floor. The trees formed a half circle around us, and the creek wasn't more than 40 feet away. It wasn't deep, more like a trickle over flat rocks, but it added just the right sound to make you feel like you were somewhere far away from anything human. We cooked some food, drank coffee with whiskey in it, and played a dumb card game by the light of our headlamps before crawling into our bags. I remember lying there that night, staring up through the mesh at a patch of sky. It was so dark, but the stars felt close, like they were pushing down a little. We didn't hear a single thing that night, not even a bird. It was the second morning when something strange happened. I woke up to the sound of music. Not loud, not jarring, just soft, smooth, almost like it had been there the whole time and I was only just noticing it. A flute. I remember blinking up at the tent ceiling, thinking it was a dream. It sounded like someone playing one of those wooden flutes you see in shops or museums. The kind that has that deep, earthy sound, nothing sharp or metallic about it. It was slow, thoughtful, not a melody I knew, but it didn't feel random. It had a rhythm to it, something peaceful. I lay there listening for a while, probably a minute or two, frozen but not scared. Not yet. It wasn't coming from close, but it also wasn't far. Maybe just through the trees. It echoed lightly between the trunks, floating, wrapping around the sound of the creek like smoke. I turned my head and looked at my wife. She was awake too, eyes open, staring straight up. I knew she heard it too, but neither of us said anything. We just stayed still, listening. Eventually, we got up slowly. I unzipped the tent, careful not to make too much noise. As soon as we started moving, the music stopped. Not like it trailed off, just cut. Like whoever was playing it knew we were awake and didn't want to be heard anymore. We stepped outside, stood quietly, and looked around. Nothing. No footsteps. No rustling. No voices. Just the sound of the creek again. The trees. The wind. We didn't talk about it right away. Just went through the morning routine. Coffee. Some trail mix. Packing up our food bag. We weren't scared yet. More like unsettled. It wasn't like we'd heard a chainsaw rev up nearby or seen a shadow in the trees. It was beautiful, even, but it didn't belong out there. Not like that. Not without context. We went on with the day, hiked out for a few hours to check out a ridge we liked, then came back down for the second night. The whole time, I kept glancing into the trees, looking for movement, listening, but nothing happened. No sounds, no signs, just the woods again. That night was still, quiet, just like before, but I didn't sleep. That music stuck with me. It was peaceful, yeah, but it was also deliberate. Someone played it for a reason, and we were the only ones out there. We hadn't seen anyone coming in, and we'd gone far enough that it wasn't a place people stumbled across casually. No trail markers, no open clearings besides ours. Whoever played that flute had to know the woods, had to know where to go to find people who didn't want to be found. In the morning, we packed up and hiked out in silence. We never said the word flute, just made small talk about breakfast or the drive home. I don't think either of us wanted to be the one to make it real by naming it. We got to the car, loaded our gear, and drove off. When we stopped for gas an hour later, my wife finally said, "I liked the music, but it was strange. That was all." We never heard it again. We went back one more time that year, maybe a month later, and everything was the same as before. Quiet, empty, like the forest had reset. But that one morning stayed with me. We used to joke about it afterward, saying it was Bigfoot playing a flute, trying to charm a mate, like some lonely forest bachelor. It was a dumb way to put a lid on the weirdness, make it something light and funny. But part of me always knew we weren't really joking. I've thought about it a lot since then. What kind of person hikes out into the middle of nowhere before dawn to play native flute music near a hidden campsite? It wasn't loud enough to be for fun, like a personal concert. It wasn't for meditation. It was too well-timed, too perfectly placed to be random. I've tried to tell myself it was just someone camping nearby, maybe trying to greet the day in their own way. But I know the layout of those woods. I've checked satellite maps, looked at topography, seen the trail routes. There's no spot close enough for someone to be playing that flute unless they were deliberately moving through the woods toward us. And they stopped when we stirred. They knew. Now, I don't think about it much. We don't do off-the-trail camping anymore. Not because of that one time, not directly. Life just got busy. Kids, work. But sometimes, when I walk at night near our neighborhood or hear wind blowing through trees, I remember that sound, that soft, haunting melody played by someone who didn't want to be seen. And I still don't know if it was meant to be beautiful or a warning. I used to walk around at night when I was using heavy. That was years ago now, but I still remember the feeling like it was yesterday. My head would get twisted up on whatever I'd taken, and I couldn't sit still. I lived in a rural area, one of those scattered Newfoundland places with long gravel driveways and wide spaces between houses, where it gets so quiet at night you can hear your own blood in your ears. The kind of place where you can walk for a while and not see anyone or any sign of people, just thick woods and the occasional distant porch light flickering behind trees. At the time, I didn't think much about what I was doing. I wasn't trying to scare anybody, and I sure as hell wasn't looking for trouble. I just needed to move, to feel my legs working under me, to walk off whatever demons I'd stuck into my veins or down my throat. But I must have looked terrifying. Pale, eyes wide and empty, moving like a ghost in the dark. I didn't carry anything, usually just a lighter and whatever I was using, maybe a hoodie with the strings pulled tight. If anyone had seen me, they would have thought I was some crazy drifter or worse. And truth is, sometimes I scared myself too. There's one night that sticks out more than the rest. I'd gone deeper than usual. Normally, I stuck to the gravel shoulder of the main road near my dad's house, circling between the old mailboxes and the first bend in the road where the woods started to close in. That night, though, something was pulling at me. Could have been the stuff or just my mind wanting to feel even more lost than it already did. I'd taken a bit of everything earlier that afternoon, didn't sleep, hadn't eaten, and I felt like a wire strung too tight. So I left the road and cut into the woods. I remember stepping over the old ditch and onto the soft moss, branches snapping underfoot like twigs made of glass. The woods were dark and cold, and the air felt damp, even though it hadn't rained. I didn't bring a flashlight. I never did. I didn't want to be seen, and besides, when I was that far gone, I could see enough without one. Everything seemed sharper, edges glowing in the low light, shadows moving whether I looked at them or not. I couldn't explain it now. It just felt natural then. There was a trail of sorts, not really marked, but the brush was worn down in a line, probably used by moose or someone else walking through. I followed it, not even thinking about where it led. I walked like that for what felt like an hour, could have been 10 minutes, could have been 3. Time didn't behave the way it should when I was in that state. All I know is that after a while, I noticed something ahead of me. A small clearing, circular, surrounded by spruce and pine leaning in on all sides like they were eavesdropping on the space. It looked out of place. There were signs of old fire pits, rocks in a ring with blackened insides, a flat stump, some litter in the corners, beer cans, cigarette butts, a strip of tarp caught in a bush. I didn't think it was anyone's active camp, but it had clearly been used not that long ago. And that's when the thought hit me. If someone was camping there, I'd never see them until it was too late. I was high out of my mind, creeping through the woods at night, totally unaware of how I might look to someone half awake in a tent. One noise and I'd be a shadow 10 feet from their fire, and if they were carrying, that could be it. No warning, no time to explain. I felt my chest go tight then, and for the first time that night I started feeling scared. Still, I didn't turn around. I stepped into the clearing, moved past the fire pit, then into the next bit of woods on the far side. I thought if I just kept moving, I'd be fine. Just another dark spot in a dark forest. But the deeper I went, the more wrong it started to feel. The trail narrowed. The air thickened. Trees seemed too close together, branches clawing at me like hands. I started to hear noises, twigs cracking in the distance, something like breathing, something that could have been an animal or someone. I stopped every few steps to listen, frozen in place with my ears straining. But whatever it was always stayed just far enough away that I couldn't see it. Could have been my own steps echoing, but it felt different. Then, for no reason, I felt this huge wave of panic wash over me. I couldn't breathe right, my skin felt like it was crawling, and my legs started to move before I told them to. I needed to get out of the trees, out of the dark. I didn't know where I was anymore, couldn't tell what direction I'd come from. The trail behind me looked the same as the trail ahead. I spun in a slow circle, but everything looked identical: branches, moss, old leaves. I realized then I was lost, properly lost. I picked a direction and just started walking. I knew I was more likely to walk in a circle that way, but standing still felt worse. My thoughts were spiraling. What if I ended up on someone's land? What if I stumbled onto another clearing and someone was actually there this time? A hunter? A squatter? Poacher? The idea of a poacher stuck in my head. My uncle used to work as a kind of warden, not official park staff, but he checked permits and watched for illegal traps. He told me once how poachers would stay overnight, deep in the woods, quiet as hell, dressed in camo, with loaded guns and short tempers. If I ran into one of them looking the way I did, high and twitchy, they wouldn't ask questions. That thought made me move faster. I was crashing through the underbrush now, not bothering to be quiet. A couple times I tripped, went down hard, palms scraped and knees full of mud and pine needles. But I didn't stop. I needed to find something familiar, anything. A road, a fence line, a light in the distance. But there was nothing. Then I found it, an old railway bed, cut through the trees like a scar, flat and straight and just wide enough to walk comfortably. The gravel was still there in parts, with weeds grown up through the middle, and the wooden ties looked like rotted teeth in the earth. I had no idea which way to go, but the right side looked slightly more open, so I followed it. I walked for what felt like forever, maybe half an hour, maybe longer, and that's when I saw something off the trail. A small cabin, low and broken looking, tucked into the trees like it was hiding. It looked abandoned at first. Roof sagging, door hanging off its hinges, windows dark. But then I noticed something that didn't match the rest. A bucket near the door, not rusted, not old, and a pair of boots, wet, muddy, fresh. Someone was in there. I froze again. I didn't want to go past it, but I couldn't go back the way I came. I crouched low and moved off the railway bed into the bush, looping around the cabin in as wide an arc as I could. Every few steps I looked back over my shoulder. No lights, no noise, but I still felt like I was being watched. Eventually, the bush opened up again and I came to a logging path. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, old beer cans crushed into the mud. Civilization, sort of. I followed it, hoping it would lead somewhere. It did. It brought me out near a side road I recognized, about 5 kilometers from my dad's house. I knew the road by a bent yellow sign with a hole in it, probably from a shotgun. I crossed quickly and ducked into the ditch just as a truck came around the corner. Lights swept across me, but I don't think they saw me. Or maybe they did and didn't care. I stayed there for a while, crouched in the wet grass, heart pounding. When it was quiet again, I climbed out and kept walking, keeping to the shoulder. My hands were shaking now, not from the drugs, not from withdrawal, just pure nerves. I knew I'd pushed it too far that night. Knew I'd almost made a mistake I couldn't take back. When I finally made it back to my dad's place, I didn't go inside. I walked down to the end of the driveway and sat near the mailbox. That's where it happened. I was lighting up when I heard the door open behind me. I turned fast, too fast, eyes wide and body tense. It was his neighbor. The guy just stood there for a second, looking at me. Then he went back inside. I didn't wait around. I stood up and walked down the road, trying not to look like I was running. I knew if he came back out with anything in his hands, I was done. No one in that neighborhood asked questions. You didn't get caught creeping around someone's mailbox at night. Not unless you wanted to be on the news. That was the last time I ever went out walking at night while I was high. Something clicked that night. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was the slow, gnawing realization that I wasn't just a danger to myself anymore. I was a risk to anyone who might have crossed my path. I'd become the thing people told stories about. Some pale, wide-eyed freak creeping through the woods, half dead and looking for trouble. I stopped using a few months after that. Took longer than I'd like to admit to get clean for good. But that night stuck with me. I think about that cabin sometimes. About who might have been inside. About how close I came to ending up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because in the dark, in the woods, there's no second chances. And sometimes the scariest thing out there is you. I hike alone a lot. I've always liked it that way. I don't go out into the backcountry to be social. I go to get away from noise, away from my phone, away from people. I go because I like the rhythm of walking through places where no one else has stepped in a while. Places that make you feel small. Places that are quiet in the way cities can never be. The trail I picked that day wasn't even on a map. It started as a deer trail, just a faint winding through the brush up past an old service road. I was somewhere upstate, maybe 2 hours from home. I parked off a wide gravel shoulder near a cracked trail sign that hadn't been legible in years. I like places like that. Forgotten. You get left alone. I had 2 bottles of water, a couple protein bars, a folding knife, a lighter, and a phone with no signal. My pack was light. I wasn't going out overnight, just a long loop that would cut into some national forest land and back out again. Maybe 10, 15 miles round trip. Easy stuff. The kind of route I don't even think twice about. It was hot early that day. Humid. The sun was already burning off the last of the morning clouds when I passed the first old logging marker in the woods. I stopped and squatted near a little creek and watched the insects flicker across the water. Something about that spot stuck with me. Not in a spooky way, just something felt still. Like when you walk into a part of the woods where nothing moves and the trees feel closer together, and you don't really know why. I moved on. About 3 miles in, the trail vanished. It just dissolved under the weight of the undergrowth. That happens more than people think. A deer trail becomes a nothing trail, and you end up bushwhacking for a while before something new opens up again. I didn't mind. I still had plenty of light. I stepped carefully around roots and dead branches, made my way through a patch of fern and up over a rise where the forest got darker. That's where it started. I didn't notice anything at first, just a sense of quiet. Not that kind of peaceful quiet you get in the woods either. This was something else, a little too quiet. No bird sounds, no breeze in the trees. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. I stopped walking and just listened. There was something behind me, I thought. A crunch or shift, very soft like a boot on dry pine needles. I turned fast, but there was nothing there. Just a mess of trees and shadows. No breeze, no bird calls, no insects. I waited a few seconds, then kept moving. It happened again, maybe 5 minutes later. This time I was walking a little slower, and I stopped mid-step because I heard it again. Just a tiny sound. Not loud, but there. A faint rustle. That's when I realized it had been happening more than once. Every time I stopped, the sound stopped. But when I started walking again, 10 seconds later, maybe 20, I'd hear it faintly behind me. I figured maybe it was a deer, or even a bear, but that didn't seem right. Bears are louder than that when they move. They're not exactly sneaky, and deer don't usually follow people. I changed direction, took a sharp right and headed down a slope. My boots slipped in some wet leaves, but I moved fast. I made sure to step across a fallen log and into some mud, just to hear how much noise I made. I paused there for a good 30 seconds, crouched low, holding my breath. And again I heard it. Another step, then silence. I felt something tighten behind my ears. That weird cold pressure you get when your body knows something's wrong, even if your brain hasn't caught up yet. I turned around slowly, scanning. I looked up into the trees, behind fallen logs, into thick brambles. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was there. I kept going. I didn't run, but I didn't stop to look around either. I figured maybe I'd spook it if it was an animal, but I also didn't like the idea of running in case it made me look like prey. I walked for another 15 minutes, trying to stay calm. Then I saw a clearing up ahead. I made for it fast. Turned out to be an old logging site. The grass had grown up around the stumps, and the center had a rusted-out husk of what might have once been a bulldozer or some kind of hauler. I climbed up on it and just stood there, high up, scanning the treeline. Still nothing. Then something happened that I haven't told anyone before. I tossed my water bottle down onto the ground next to the machine. It was a loud enough noise that I figured anything in the woods might react. But the bottle didn't bounce. That's the part that still messes with me. It was like it landed on something soft. I heard a muffled thump, not the normal hollow bounce sound. And then it was just gone. I jumped down fast and checked where it landed. I swear to God, there was nothing there. No water bottle, no weird soft moss, nothing, just packed dirt and some old leaves. I moved them around with my boot, checked the undercarriage of the old machine. Nothing. And then I heard it again, this time closer. Not a rustle, a breath. It was right behind me. I turned hard, slipping as I did. There was still nothing, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming now. I could feel it on my skin. My neck was sweating, the back of my knees. Every part of me felt like I'd been holding tension for hours. And that's when I remembered my cat. He'd been doing this thing lately, hunting mice. We'd had a problem with them in the basement. He'd slink around for hours, tail low, moving like water. He's a big cat, goofy most of the time, but when he hunted, it was like he changed. Like he turned off some switch in himself and became all muscle and silence. Even with the bell on his collar, he could move without making a sound. I watched him once disappear behind a jacket crumpled on the floor, just gone, like he folded himself into nothing. The kitten he was playing with had no idea where he went. I thought about that as I stood there in the middle of the clearing, hearing a breath come from nowhere. Whatever was following me was hunting. It wasn't making noise because it knew how not to. It had been following me for miles and never once broke a branch or kicked a stone. And every time I stopped, it stopped too. Just like my cat. Just like a predator. I started walking again, this time not even trying to stay quiet. I figured it didn't matter anymore. It already knew where I was. I needed to get out of there, but I'd lost the trail. I didn't know where I was. That messed me up worse than anything. I'm good with directions. I always leave markers when I go off trail. But I'd been so focused on the sounds behind me, I hadn't thought to keep track. Now everything looked the same. Dark trees, moss, uneven ground. I started to sweat harder. My shirt stuck to my back. My chest got tight. I turned in a wide circle, trying to find anything familiar. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the weight of eyes I couldn't see. Then I saw a shape between the trees. It was small, almost like a pile of clothes. I moved toward it cautiously. Maybe someone had camped there. Maybe it was an old pack or gear someone dropped. It was my water bottle, the one that had vanished, just sitting there on the ground like someone had set it out for me to find. I didn't touch it. I turned and walked the other way. At that point, I wasn't thinking anymore, just moving. Not running, not walking, just something in between. Fast enough to make distance, slow enough to stay on my feet. And the forest got quieter. No birds, no insects, no leaves shifting in the breeze. It was like I was walking through a bubble, and that feeling never left, that I was being hunted, that there was something just behind me watching. I finally saw a trail marker after what felt like an hour of walking. It was just a small plastic tag nailed into a tree, half faded. But it meant I was near a service road again. Civilization. That snapped something loose in me. I ran the last mile. I don't even remember the path clearly. Just the blur of trees, the snap of branches hitting my arms, the sharp stitch in my ribs. I made it back to my car and locked the doors. I didn't see anything on the drive home. No headlights behind me. No figures in the trees. Just empty road. I still don't know what was out there, but I know what it felt like. Felt like my cat in hunting mode. Like something that knew how to move without being heard. how to vanish, how to anticipate where you'd go next. Something that knew I was out there alone and waited until I was too far in to turn back. I've never hiked that trail again, and I don't hike without keeping track of everything now. Every turn, every sound, every gut feeling. Because once you've been followed by something silent, something that's smart enough to let you almost catch it, you stop pretending that the woods are just peaceful and empty. You start to understand they're full of things that don't want to be seen, and some of them are very, very good at it. I was about 12 the first time I camped near Harrison Lake, a stretch of water tucked into the southern part of British Columbia. Back then, it didn't take much to impress me. A pile of rocks near a river looked like a castle. The shapes in the clouds were signs, and trees always seemed like they were watching, listening. Everything out there felt alive, but not in a way that scared me. Felt good, wild and good. My dad used to take me and a few of his friends out every summer. We didn't go for the campgrounds with the parking lots and grills. We hiked in, found a spot by the lake or up near the trails and made camp. Simple stuff. Tarps, sleeping bags, a cooler. Sometimes we brought tents, sometimes we didn't. That particular trip, we didn't bring tents. It was my dad's idea. He always thought sleeping out under the stars was something everyone should experience at least once. Said you could feel the air better, hear the sounds of the forest like they were meant to be heard. That kind of thing. I didn't mind. At 12, I thought it made me tougher. Like one of those survival guys on TV who drink water out of plants and eat bugs. My dad's friend, Gary, was the only one who had a problem with it, but he didn't argue. It was his 40th birthday that weekend, and I think he was just happy to be out there with the rest of us. I remember he brought a little flask and made some joke about it keeping him warm through the night. We hiked out about 4 or 5 miles from the road. Not too far, but far enough that the sounds of traffic and civilization were completely gone. No light except for what came from the sky and our campfire. No noises but what the wind and animals made. The trees there were big, tall Douglas firs, some old red cedars, a few pines, and they grew tight together in places, but we found a little open patch near a slope that led down to a stream. There were a couple of flat spots where we could lay out our sleeping bags in a row, a fire ring someone had used before, and a long fallen log that worked as a bench. Perfect spot, really. We got there in the afternoon, cooked some hot dogs over the fire, and just relaxed. I remember how cold the water from the stream was, even in the middle of summer. It stung my hands when I filled my bottle, but it tasted better than anything I'd had back home. The forest was quiet that day, almost unnaturally so, but I didn't think much of it then. I'd learn later that sometimes silence out there is a signal, a warning that most people don't notice until it's too late. That night, the fire burned low while we lay in our sleeping bags, staring up at the stars. I was tucked in close between my dad and a log on one side, feeling safe. I watched the sky change colors from blue to black, little points of light winking through the canopy. There were crickets at first and some owls farther off. Someone across the fire, Gary or maybe another of Dad's friends, snored a bit. Then I drifted off, just like that. No fear, no tension, just sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark, not quite pitch black. Moonlight came through the trees, and I could see the outline of Gary's boots and a cooking pan nearby. I didn't know why I woke up. There wasn't a sound or a movement, just a feeling. One of those things that you can't explain, but something in you stirs and says, "Open your eyes, now." I lay there for a while, not moving, just listening. My breath felt louder than anything else around me, and I tried to quiet it without even thinking. There was no wind, no rustling, no crickets or owls, just stillness. Eventually, I drifted off again. No idea how long that lasted, but the next thing I remember was waking up to morning light bleeding through the trees. Everything was damp with dew. My sleeping bag felt colder than I expected, like it had been sitting in the shade for hours. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and looked around. My dad was already up, poking at the remains of the fire with a stick, while another of his friends stood near the edge of the slope, stretching his back. It looked like a normal morning, calm, slow. But then Gary let out this low whistle. He wasn't standing. He was still in his sleeping bag, propped up on one elbow, looking down at something near his head. I didn't see it at first, not from where I was, but my dad did, and he walked over quickly. That's when I heard the words, "Bear scat." He didn't yell it, just said it out loud, and the others came over, looking down at it. I got up and walked over too, and there it was, no mistaking it. A big, dark, wet pile of bear scat, no more than 2 feet from where Gary's head had been. The dirt around it was pressed down a little, like the animal had stood there for a minute, maybe sniffed, maybe just looked. You could see the prints faintly in the pine needles leading up to it, broad paws, heavy impressions. It had come from the trees to the north, stopped right by Gary's head, done its business, and then turned back around and left. No one said much after that. Nobody laughed, not even Gary, and he was usually the loudest one in the group. He just sat there, staring at it, not moving. After a few minutes, he quietly started rolling up his sleeping bag. I remember watching his hands shake a little. My dad brushed some of the dirt around to cover the mess a bit, but he didn't touch it otherwise. He took a long look around, scanning the trees, the trail, the slope. We didn't see any more signs. No claw marks, no shredded logs, no more scat. But we all knew what it meant. That bear had come into camp sometime during the night, walked within feet of us, probably smelled us, maybe smelled the fire, or the food, or the leather of the boots. And it didn't care. It wasn't scared. What struck me most, though, was how quiet it had been. None of us had heard it. Not a single branch breaking, not a rustle of leaves. It had moved in like a ghost and left the same way. That's what stuck with me. That silence. The idea that something that big could come so close and leave behind nothing but a steaming pile and a few sunken paw prints. We packed up quicker than usual that morning. No one really talked. We ate a few granola bars, skipped the coffee, and headed back toward the car. The forest felt different now. Not hostile, not exactly, but heavy. Like we'd been reminded of something we'd forgotten. That we didn't belong there, not really. That even though we came in with gear and food and fire, we were still guests. And the landlord had stopped by in the night to make that clear. Gary didn't come on the next trip, or the one after that. I heard later he still went camping sometimes, but only at campgrounds. The kind with RVs and rangers and fences. I don't blame him. I never forgot that night either. It changed how I see the woods. Even now, decades later, I still camp sometimes. I've gone back to Harrison, even returned to the same ridge once. I always bring a tent now, and I don't sleep with my back to the woods. I hang food high, keep my area clean, and I never forget what can come in the night. Because when you're asleep out there, it's not about how tough you are or how far you hiked or what gear you brought. It's about how quiet something can be, how close it can get without you even knowing. That morning, Gary got a birthday gift he'd never asked for. A reminder that in the wild, you're not the top of the chain. You're not even close. And that's what I remember most about that trip. Not the lake, not the fire, not the stars, but the silence and the pile steaming in the cold morning air, just 2 feet from his head. I'd been hiking across Newfoundland for almost 2 weeks by the time this happened. I was following the route of an old railway line that had long since been torn up and converted into a trail. It ran straight through forests, open marshes, rocky hills, and old small towns that felt more like memories than real places. I planned the trip with a loose idea of distance but no fixed schedule. I'd carry everything I needed and sleep wherever I ended up when the sun got low. Some nights I stayed near the trail, tucked into the brush. Other nights I'd find a nice spot down by a brook or out on a ridge. I liked the simplicity of it. No traffic noise, no phone reception, no clocks. Just walking, eating, and sleeping. I didn't go out there looking for trouble. I wasn't trying to test myself or make some big discovery about life. I just wanted to be out in the woods for a while. I grew up in a small town, and I've always been more comfortable in nature than in cities. I like watching the way light moves through the trees and the way things quiet down as the day fades. I like that you have to work for your comfort out there. It makes you appreciate small things. A dry tent, a warm meal, a calm evening breeze. This particular day had started out normal. I walked maybe 25 kilometers, just a steady pace with my pack bouncing lightly against my back. The weather was decent, overcast with bits of sunlight pushing through now and then. Nothing too hot or too cold. The trail had been flat for most of the day, with long stretches cutting through thick spruce woods and open areas where the railway used to run alongside ponds or swampy patches. I remember passing a few old markers and rusted signs, mostly unreadable now, and the remnants of a small station that had collapsed into itself like a tired old man. Late in the afternoon, I came to a bend in the trail where the trees opened up, and I saw what looked like a cluster of cabins and trailers spread out in the trees. It wasn't on my map, but that didn't mean much out there. Newfoundland has a lot of these little half-forgotten places, old mining or fishing settlements that faded out once the work dried up or the roads changed. This one had that look. Wooden shacks with peeling paint, busted-out windows, overgrown paths, and a general stillness that told me no one had been around for a while. Some of the places looked like they'd been converted buses or RVs at one point, probably used as summer cottages or hunting cabins. A few were collapsed entirely, just piles of wood and metal sticking out of the grass. One of them looked like it had caught fire, blackened inside, with the roof caved in and soot streaks running down the siding. It felt like walking through a snapshot of a place after everyone had just up and left. There were clotheslines still strung up between trees, sagging now, and a rusted tricycle half buried in moss. I figured it might be a good spot to camp for the night. The ground was flat, and there was a clearing near the edge of the cottages that looked like it had once been a small parking area. There was even an old truck there, long dead, nose dipped down into a ravine where the edge of the clearing dropped off sharply. The tires were flat, and the body was half-eaten by rust. Nature had started claiming it, vines curling up through the broken windshield and ferns growing through the bed. I dropped my pack near the edge of that lot and took a quick walk through the area just to be sure it was empty. Everything seemed long abandoned. A few trailers had busted doors. One cabin was boarded up, and another was missing part of its roof. No tire tracks, no signs of recent use, no smell of smoke or food, just that damp, musty scent that you get in old buildings when water sits in wood too long. I didn't feel scared, just cautious. I've always believed that places like that are more likely to be dangerous because of people than animals. Not that I expected to find anyone out there. It was remote, off the main roads, and well away from any towns I'd passed. But I still made a note of the exits and the terrain around me. If I needed to leave quickly, I wanted to know where to go. As the light started to fade, I set up my tent at the far end of the clearing, close to a small cluster of birch trees. I kept it simple. I had a lightweight solo tent, just enough space to crawl in and lie down. I boiled some water on my little camp stove and cooked up one of those freeze-dried meals, chili mac, I think. Not bad when you're tired and hungry. I sat on a log while I ate, watching the shadows stretch out between the trees and listening to the wind move through the branches. There was no animal noise. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. That happens sometimes, especially late in the day, but it stuck out to me a little. Still, I didn't think much of it at the time. Once I cleaned up, I packed away my gear like I always do. Food sealed tight in a bear bag, trash packed out, stove cooled and stowed. I double-checked the zippers on my tent, crawled inside, and lay back on my mat. I had a good sleeping bag, and the air was cool but not cold. I fell asleep faster than I expected. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was dark, really dark, and everything was quiet. I opened my eyes slowly, trying to remember where I was. Then I heard it, footsteps. Not fast, not running. Just slow, steady steps. Crunching leaves and soft scuffs against the dirt. Close, too close. My heart started going like a drum. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or a moose, but the pattern wasn't right. Four-legged animals move differently. These were distinct. Human steps, one at a time with little pauses. They came closer, circled slowly around the tent. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. The ground outside was soft, so I could only hear them when the person stepped on twigs or dry leaves. They walked partway around, stopped, then took a few more steps. At one point, they were standing right behind my head, only a foot or two from where I lay. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I don't carry a gun when I hike, but I do keep a decent-sized knife in my pack. I'd left it zipped in the side pocket of the tent. Slowly, trying to keep my movements silent, I reached out and felt for it. My fingers found the handle. I eased it out and held it in front of me, blade angled upward. I didn't have a plan beyond that. Just wait. If the zipper started to move, I was going to lunge. But the zipper never moved. After a long few minutes, the steps began to move again. Away this time, back toward the trees, then further off. I waited. I didn't hear anything else for a while. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes passed, maybe longer. I lay there in the dark, gripping that knife until my hand ached. Eventually, I made the decision. I wasn't staying. I moved carefully, unzipping the tent just enough to peek out. Nothing in sight. I slid the rest of the way out and crouched low. I didn't use my flashlight, didn't want to announce myself. I packed fast but quiet, just stuffing everything into my bag without much care for order. Tent, stove, food, mat, all of it shoved in. I slung the pack over my shoulder and walked back to the trail without looking back. Once I hit the trail, I kept moving. I didn't run, but I walked fast. The trail was wide enough that even without a light, I could stay on it by feel. My boots crunched softly on the gravel as I moved. Every few hundred meters, I stopped and listened. Nothing behind me, nothing in the woods, just wind and night. I walked like that for hours. No idea how far I went, just kept going. At one point, the stars faded and the sky began to glow with that early gray light that comes before sunrise. I remember passing an old railway marker and feeling like I was finally putting distance between myself and that place. Sometime mid-morning, I reached a gravel road that crossed the trail. I followed it, hoping it led to something. About an hour later, I spotted a pickup truck bouncing slowly down the road toward me. I stepped off to the side and waved. The guy inside looked surprised but pulled over. He was older, maybe mid-60s, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap. I didn't say much, just asked if he could give me a ride to the nearest town. He nodded and unlocked the door. He drove me to a small town I can't even remember the name of now. I found a motel, paid cash, and spent the next 12 hours sleeping like a rock. I didn't go back to that trail. I ended my hike early and caught a bus off the island a couple days later. Now and then, I think about that night. I think about the steps, the silence, the way someone stood behind my tent without saying a word. Whoever it was, they didn't want to be seen. They didn't want me there. Maybe they were living in one of those cabins, squatting out there alone. Maybe they were poaching, using the old trail to move around without drawing attention. Hell, maybe they were just curious. But people don't walk up to strangers' tents in the dark unless they mean to do something. What really sticks with me is the thought that they were probably watching me before I even set up camp. Maybe from one of the cabins. Maybe they saw me walk in, cook my food, crawl into my tent, and waited until the dark made it easy to come close. I've still got a few pictures from earlier that day. Old cabins half swallowed by trees, the rusted-out bus with moss on the roof, the abandoned truck with its nose in the ravine. I don't look at them much anymore. They remind me of how I've been planning a solo hike through the Rockies for months. I wasn't aiming for any sort of big accomplishment or trying to prove anything. I just wanted some time away from people, screens, and noise. I picked an area just remote enough that I'd be alone for long stretches, but still within a couple days' walk of access points if something went wrong. I'd hiked most of my life, done plenty of solo weekend trips, but this was the longest stretch I'd planned alone. 8 days. No cell service, no towns, just me and whatever the trail brought with it. I started in the early morning from a small trailhead a few hours' drive from the last real town. The air was cold and dry, the kind of cold that made you take deeper breaths without realizing it. The elevation was higher than I was used to, but I had time to ease into it. I had packed light, just enough food, a hammock setup, sleeping bag, bear spray, and the basics. No tent. I wanted to sleep with as little barrier between me and the wilderness as possible. That decision felt peaceful at the time. The first few days were uneventful in a good way. I moved through tall pine forests, heard the creak of trees in the wind, the distant tap of woodpeckers. The trails were clear but narrow, winding alongside steep hills and rocky inclines. I saw elk, squirrels, hawks. The nights were cold, colder than I had expected, and I often had to wear every layer I brought just to stay warm in the hammock. But it was quiet. Still, I never heard another human voice after day 2. On the 5th day, I found a great spot to camp. It was off the main trail, down a slope near a dried-up creek bed. The area was relatively flat, tucked among some old spruce and fir trees, with a little natural cover from wind. I made it there just as the sun was dipping low. It had been a long day, climbing switchbacks and crossing patches of lingering snow. I was exhausted. I didn't even bother with a fire, just hung the hammock between 2 sturdy trees, wrapped myself in my bag, and climbed in after a quick protein bar. No food left out, nothing messy. I always hung my bag 20 feet from where I slept, up in a tree. I knew the risks with bears and cats out here. I remember laying there, staring at the dark outlines of trees above me. There was no moon that night, just black sky and pinpricks of stars. I listened for a while, heard an owl once, maybe something small rustling through the underbrush far off, but nothing close, nothing threatening. At some point, I drifted off. When I woke up, it was from sunlight on my face. It was already higher than usual. I must have slept later than normal. The sun filtered down through the trees in thin beams. My breath puffed little clouds in the cold morning air. I stretched a bit in the hammock before swinging my legs out to stand up. That's when I saw them, about 15 feet away in the soft dirt. Prints. Clear, heavy tracks. I stepped closer, not fully understanding what I was looking at yet. The ground was a little damp from melted snow, soft enough to hold shape. Whatever it was had moved quietly. The prints circled my hammock, not once, but twice, around the perimeter. No drag marks, no signs of a chase or panic, just a slow, deliberate path. The prints were huge, bigger than any canine track I'd ever seen. Each one was roughly the size of a softball, maybe larger. No claws visible. That meant it was a cat, a big one, most likely a mountain lion. They're not that uncommon in the Rockies, but they usually stay clear of people, especially people who are awake and alert. But I had been neither. I was alone, cocooned in a hammock, and completely unaware of a full-grown mountain lion circling me in the dark. I crouched down and followed the prints with my eyes. They came in from behind the slope, crept up toward the trees near me, looped around one side of my hammock, curved around the back, and then headed off again in the opposite direction. The spacing between prints told me it had been walking slowly, quietly. I scanned the trees in the direction it left, but there was nothing but branches and shadows. I didn't say anything, didn't make a noise. I just stood there for a long time, feeling the back of my neck crawl. My skin felt cold, but not from the weather. It was something deeper, a kind of awareness that doesn't happen often, realizing just how vulnerable you are, how little control you actually have out here. I had been asleep, helpless, while something strong enough to kill me silently had walked within spitting distance. I packed up slowly. I kept checking the trees, the shadows, expecting to catch a glimpse of it still watching me. But nothing moved. No birds, no squirrels. The forest was too quiet. I didn't eat breakfast. I just grabbed my food bag from the tree, stuffed everything into my pack, and got moving. Every snap of a branch made me flinch. Every gust of wind made me turn my head. I didn't run, I couldn't afford to, not at this altitude, not with a full pack. But I moved faster than usual. I kept my bear spray in my hand, thumb resting lightly near the trigger. That day felt endless. I covered more miles than I had planned, moving through uneven ground, slippery rocks, and thick brush. I passed places that might have made good camps, but I didn't stop. I didn't want to. I didn't feel safe anywhere. I didn't know how far a mountain lion could track someone, and I didn't want to find out. Eventually, I reached a wide open meadow where the trail flattened out. The sun was still up, and I had about 2 hours of daylight left. It wasn't ideal, but I decided to set up camp right there, in the open. No trees, no cover. It was exposed, but I'd rather have visibility than shelter. I tied my hammock to 2 shorter trees on the edge of the meadow, where I could see every angle around me. I even laid sticks and rocks around my camp in a loose ring. Not for defense, just so I might hear if something stepped on them. That night, I didn't sleep much. My eyes kept opening every few minutes. I'd stare into the dark, listening for the soft pad of paws on grass or the whisper of movement in the brush. Nothing came. Morning finally arrived like a relief I didn't know I could feel. I had made it through the night, but I still felt watched. I stayed alert the rest of the hike. Never camped in the same kind of spot twice. Avoided heavy forest cover. Made noise on the trail. Never left food unsealed or close by. For the next few days, I didn't see any more tracks, but I still didn't sleep well. Every night felt like it could happen again. I reached the end of my hike on the 8th day, dirty, tired, and more anxious than when I'd started. I'd gone into the Rockies looking for peace, but what I found was something different. An understanding of how close danger can be without you ever knowing it. When I got back to town, I cleaned up and stopped at a ranger station to let them know about the prints I saw. The ranger I talked to nodded, said there had been reports of cats near that area before, but no incidents. I asked if it was normal for them to get that close to people. He said it wasn't unheard of, especially if you were quiet, not moving, and didn't smell like anything threatening. Sometimes they're just curious, but that wasn't much comfort. Curiosity from a predator isn't something you want to experience firsthand. I still hike, I still camp, but I haven't gone solo since that trip. Not because I'm scared of nature, but because there are things out there that move silently, things that don't need your permission to watch you, circle you, and decide, for reasons you'll never understand, whether you're interesting enough to take a closer look at or safe enough to leave behind. And the truth is, the only reason I'm able to tell this story at all is because that cat made the second choice.